3 weeks before my younger daughter's wedding, I made one phone call that cost me my older daughter, my standing at my own church, and every ounce of dignity I'd spent a year quietly buying back. And I want to be honest that I knew exactly how that call would look if anyone ever found out. I simply never imagined my own daughter would stand up in the middle of a ballroom full of 200 people and read the receipts out loud. I'm putting this down somewhere because the women at church have their version of what happened now, and it isn't mine, and I've stopped trying to correct it out loud because correcting it out loud is apparently what started all of this in the first place. My name is Sylvia. I'm 61. My husband died of a heart attack in our driveway when he was 44, dropped between the car and the mailbox on an ordinary Tuesday, and I was left with 2 girls, Dana, who was 17, and Bryn, who was 10, a part-time job at a fabric store, and a widow's pension that covered maybe 2/3 of what a household actually needs to look like. It isn't struggling. I want to explain the rule I made for myself that year, because I think it's the part people judge the fastest without ever having lived a version of it. I decided somewhere in that first terrible month that this family was not going to become the family the church quietly pitied, the one with the store brand casserole and the lawn nobody edged. I had grown up that family myself, the cousin at the good relatives table who got seated near the kitchen, and I had promised myself long before Richard ever died that I would not raise my own girls inside that particular kind of looking down. I should say more about where that promise actually came from, because I don't think you can understand what I did without understanding what was done to me first, even though I know full well that explaining a thing is not the same as excusing it. My own mother was the poor cousin in her family, and I grew up watching her thank people too quickly for hand-me-downs, watching her laugh a half-second too long at jokes made at our expense because laughing along was cheaper than objecting. I promised myself at 12 years old, sitting at somebody else's good table, that I would never raise children who had to learn that particular skill, and then I spent the next 4 decades so terrified of that old feeling that I never noticed I'd built a new way of producing it. Dana became, without my ever sitting her down and assigning it to her, the one who made that promise possible. She bagged groceries after school. She learned to stretch one chicken across 3 dinners. I want to be honest that I have never once called what she did a burden, because in my mind it wasn't one. It was simply what a capable person does for a family that needs her. And I understand now only recently that calling something a gift instead of a burden doesn't actually change what it costs the person giving it. I remember one Christmas in particular. Dana was 19, hosting 20 relatives in my own kitchen because I'd asked her to, turkey and 2 pies and the good tablecloth. And when the table filled to its 20 seats, she took her own plate and ate standing at the counter. And I told her at the time that a hostess's daughter makes room, and I meant it as something close to a compliment, evidence that she understood how a family like ours had to operate to look the way I needed it to look. I did not see until very recently how that sentence sounded to a girl who had just cooked an entire holiday and then been asked to disappear from her own table for it. Bryn was the baby, and I protected her the way you protect the baby. And I don't think I ever sat down and decided that Dana would get less softness because of it. It simply worked out that way. The same way water finds the lowest point in a yard without anyone digging a channel for it. I loved both my daughters. I want that understood before anything else in this. I also learned, watching Dana build an entire catering company out of nothing but stubbornness and a rented kitchen, that a mother can be genuinely proud of a daughter's strength, while also, very quietly, coming to expect that strength as a kind of standing arrangement. When Bryn got engaged to Tate Prescott, I felt something come alive in me that I hadn't felt in decades, and I want to try to describe it honestly rather than dress it up. The Prescotts are the closest thing our town has to old money. The insurance agency on the square, the pew third from the front, a hospital wing with the family name over the door, in letters you can read from a moving car. Tate's grandmother, Vivian, sits over all of it like a woman who has never once had to raise her voice to be heard. And when Bryn came into my kitchen with that ring on her finger, I understood immediately that I was being handed a door I had wanted opened my entire adult life. The door into a room where nobody quietly pities you anymore. I told Dana, gripping her arm in my own kitchen, that we would walk into the Prescott family through the front door, and I meant every word of it, and I want to be honest that I did not yet know what walking through a door like that was going to cost, or more precisely, who was going to be asked to pay for it. I want to describe, honestly, what the months leading up to that wedding actually did to me, because I think it matters for understanding how a woman ends up somewhere she never would have predicted for herself. I changed the way I dressed for church. I borrowed a bracelet from a woman 2 pews over because it looked like something Vivian might wear, and I practiced alone in my car more than once saying the Prescott name the way Vivian said it, with that small, deliberate pause in the middle, as though the name itself deserved a moment of respect before you finished it. I sat at my own kitchen table some evenings with the guest list spread out, moving names around by hand, and I told myself I was simply being thorough, when what I was actually doing was rehearsing for a role I hadn't been fully cast in yet. Dana gave the wedding gift I'd have expected of her. Dana gave the wedding gift I'd have expected of her, the venue deposit, the entire 5-course dinner at cost, her own crew, her own knives, because that is who she has always been in this family, the one who produces the beautiful thing while everyone else enjoys having produced it. I took that gift, I want to be honest, the way you take something you've quietly come to expect rather than something you've been startled and humbled by, and I do not think I thanked her the way the size of it actually deserved. Vivian Prescott came to the menu tasting in April, and I want to describe what happened in me watching her move through my daughter's kitchen, because it is the actual center of everything that came after. She tasted the food, complimented it in that particular tone the very wealthy use, admiring and appraising in the same breath, and her eyes moved over the room the way you'd assess a property before deciding what it was worth. And when she mentioned, lightly, almost as an aside, that her own granddaughter, Adelaide, had been flower girl at 3 Prescott weddings and that the girl seemed born for a church aisle, I felt something in me go very still and very alert, the specific stillness of a woman recognizing an opening before she's decided what to do with it. I laughed too quickly that day and covered it with the same sentence I'd used my whole life to smooth over exactly this kind of moment, that everyone gives something to make a wedding beautiful. And I want to be honest that I said it as a reflex, not yet as a plan, though I understand now that reflexes like that one don't come from nowhere. They come from decades of practice managing rooms exactly like it. Vivian and I talked longer that afternoon than the tasting required, heads together over coffee. Neither of us drank, and what she offered me over the following weeks, in pieces, never all at once, was $10,000 toward the wedding. A videographer, a champagne tower, upgraded chairs, the kind of polish that would let my daughter's wedding sit in the same room as a Prescott wedding without anyone quietly measuring the difference. The condition, never written down, never stated as bluntly as I'm stating it now, was that the flower girl would be Adelaide, the way she'd been at every other wedding on that side of the family, a tradition, Vivian called it, and traditions, she said, matter to old families. I want to describe one more specific memory from that stretch because it's the one I keep circling back to. Bryn came by one afternoon in May with fabric swatches for the chair covers, the kind Vivian's money was paying to upgrade, and while she was laying them across my table, she mentioned, almost in passing, how excited Josie was, still practicing her pedal toss every night, still counting her spins in the hallway. I remember smiling and saying something warm and useless about how sweet that was, while some other part of me was already 3 steps down a road that ended with that same little girl sitting at home with a sitter. I did not stop the conversation to reconsider anything. I complimented the swatches and let Bryn leave thinking everything was exactly as settled as she believed it to be. I want to try to explain what I actually felt accepting that arrangement, because I think the honest answer is more complicated than either greed or cruelty, though I understand it produced the exact same result as both. I thought about my own childhood, seated near the kitchen at my aunt's good table, and I thought about Dana's daughter, Josie, a serious, careful little girl who had already been given so much of my own daughter's love that she'd never once had to sit near a kitchen in her life. And some old, unexamined part of me decided, without ever fully saying so to myself, that a Prescott wedding tradition was simply the price of finally getting to sit at the good table myself, and that a 7-year-old's disappointment, weighed against 40 years of being the poor relation, was a price I was willing to let someone else pay. I sat with Vivian's arrangement for 3 full days before I made that call, and I want to describe those 3 days honestly, because I think people assume a decision like mine gets made in a single cold instant, and mine wasn't. The first day I told myself it wasn't really decided yet, that I was simply listening to an offer. The second day I caught myself already drafting, in my head, the soft words I'd use to tell Dana, which meant some part of me had already decided even while the rest of me was still pretending otherwise. The third day I called Vivian back before I called my own daughter and said yes, and I remember hanging up that phone and sitting in my kitchen for a long time afterward, not proud, not yet ashamed either, just very quiet, the way you get quiet right after you've done something you know you'll need to explain to yourself later. I called Dana 3 weeks before the wedding and told her Josie would be sitting this one out, framed as simplest, as kindest, as tradition, using every soft word I had ever learned to use for hard things, and I told her not to make it a thing, the same sentence I'd used on her since she was 17 years old, whenever her feelings threatened to become inconvenient to the appearance I was managing. I did not tell her about the check. I told myself, in that specific way you can tell yourself almost anything if you word it carefully enough, that she would never actually need to know where the money came from, only that the wedding would be beautiful, and that beauty, in my experience, tends to make people forget to ask hard questions about its cost. There was a walk-through at the church a few weeks before the wedding, and Josie came in her practice shoes, carrying a small basket, and I sat near the back with Vivian and watched that child move down the aisle with more seriousness than most adults manage at their own weddings. And I want to be honest that something in me flinched watching her. A small, unwelcome recognition of exactly what I was about to take away from a child who had done nothing except love this family, enough to practice for it. I did not act on that flinch. I filed it, the way I have filed most inconvenient feelings for 40 years, and kept moving toward the arrangement I'd already all but agreed to. I want to be honest that I do not fully know how Dana found out, only that 9 days before the wedding, she called me holding a number, and I could hear in her voice that she already had most of the shape of it, even before I confirmed a single detail. I did not deny it because I have never been a woman who denies things outright. Denial admits a crime happened, and I have spent my whole life managing rooms instead of admitting things to them. I gave her the accounting instead, the $60,000 on the Prescott side against our own, the dignity I believed Vivian's money had purchased for Bryn, the certainty that Josie, being 7, would forget all of it by August. I gave my own toast earlier that evening, before any of this happened, 3 tidy minutes about family being the one thing money can't buy, and I remember the room nodding along with me the way rooms do when you've said something that sounds true, whether or not it is. And I remember feeling briefly that I had finally arrived exactly where I'd spent a year trying to arrive, at the head of a beautiful room, no one looking down, no one thinking, casserole. I did not know yet how short that feeling was going to last. I did not expect what happened at that wedding, and I want to be honest that even now, months later, I go back and forth on how much of what happened I actually deserved. Dana catered every course of that dinner perfectly because she is constitutionally incapable of doing otherwise, and then just before the cake, she stood up in the middle of that ballroom in her chef's whites and told 200 people exactly what her daughter's place at that wedding had actually cost. Itemized, calm, worse than angry, and handed me an invoice for the full value of everything she'd quietly been planning to give us for free. I want to describe the actual physical experience of sitting there while she spoke, because I think that's the part I haven't told anyone. My hands went cold first, then my hearing narrowed, the way it does right before you faint. Though I didn't faint, I just heard her voice arriving from somewhere slightly far away, itemizing my own arrangement back to me in a room full of people I had spent a year trying to impress. And underneath the panic, absurdly, some small, ruined part of me was still tracking the room's reaction the way I always have, still managing even while I was actively being unmade. I stood up when she named the figure because some old reflex in me still believed that standing up straighter could out-argue a fact once it was already loose in a room. And I said something about family being the one thing money can't buy, and I understand now, hearing it back in my own memory, exactly how that sentence must have sounded to 200 people who had just been shown the receipt, proving I'd bought a piece of it outright. I said something true in that ballroom, too, underneath the panic, and I want it on the record, even though it did not excuse anything. I told the room, and I meant it, that I had spent my entire life as the poor relation, the charity pew, the kindness that looks down, and that I had wanted one time for this family to walk into a room and not be quietly pitied. And I watched, even as I said it, the room's sympathy arrive and then curdle. Because wanting something that badly does not give you the right to spend a 7-year-old to get it. And some part of me has always known that even while doing exactly that. Vivian sent a single text in the days after, 4 words, magnificent, truly. I have chosen not to try to work out what she meant by it because I suspect whatever answer I landed on would only make me feel worse about the year I'd spent trying to earn her good opinion in the first place. I have not spoken to Dana since that night. I have paid the invoice in full, 4 days inside the deadline she set, because whatever else is true about me, I have never once failed to settle an account, once it was actually presented to my face rather than managed around. Bryn called me twice in the week after, crying both times, and I understand from what little reaches me now that she has apologized to Dana more directly than she has ever managed to apologize to me, which I notice and try not to let myself feel too much about. The church ladies have their version, and half of them, I'm told, have started ordering their event trays from my daughter's company instead of asking after me, which is its own kind of verdict delivered without anyone having to say a single unkind word to my face. I go to services alone now. I sit a little closer to the back than I used to. I missed Josie's birthday in the fall, not because I wasn't invited exactly, but because no invitation ever came, and I spent that particular Saturday alone in my kitchen not baking anything, because baking something with no one to give it to felt like its own kind of performance I no longer had the stomach for. I understand. sitting with that empty Saturday, a small fraction of what I once asked a 7-year-old to carry, alone at a wedding she'd practiced 2 months for. And I want to be honest that understanding it in my body rather than just in my head took considerably longer than it should have. I think some nights about the exact moment I decided the check was worth what it cost. Standing in my kitchen with Vivian's offer laid out like a place setting, and I still cannot tell you, honestly, whether I was protecting my daughter's future in that family or simply finally buying myself a seat I'd wanted my whole life and letting someone smaller than me cover the difference. I go back and forth. Some days I believe both were true at once, and some days I think that's just the story I tell myself so the second one doesn't have to stand there alone. About 4 months after the wedding, I did the one thing I had never once done in 40 years of managing rooms instead of admitting things to them. I wrote Dana an actual letter, by hand. No soft words, no, everyone gives something, just a plain accounting of what I'd done and why, and a single request at the bottom, not for forgiveness, because I didn't feel entitled to ask for that yet, just for 1 hour in a public place of her choosing, so I could say the rest of it to Josie's face instead of to a page. She wrote back 3 weeks later, shorter than my letter and harder to read in a different way. She said she wasn't ready to call it resolved and that she wasn't sure resolved was even the right word for what this could ever become, but she'd meet me once at a coffee shop near her kitchen on Frontage Road and that I should not expect Josie to be there. Not yet. Maybe not for a long while. And that whatever I wanted to say to a 7-year-old, I could say to her mother first and earn the rest one visit at a time, if I earned it at all. We sat across from each other for 40 minutes in that coffee shop, and I said the true version of it, the poor relation, the check, the 3 days, all of it, without the varnish I'd used in that ballroom. And Dana listened without interrupting the way she listens to a client's complaint before she quotes them a fix. And at the end, she didn't hug me and she didn't tell me it was fine. She told me that showing up with the truth instead of an excuse was the first thing I'd done in this whole story that actually cost me something I wanted to keep, and that she'd think about what came next. I have not seen Josie since the wedding. I don't know yet if I will. I understand finally that not knowing is the price, and that it may simply be the price for a while yet, possibly for good. I don't have a clean way to end this, not fully, though I no longer think I get to leave it as unfinished as I once might have. I raised a daughter who turned out to have more integrity in 3 minutes with a spoon and a water glass than I managed to hold on to in 40 years of trying to buy my way out of being looked down on, and I have since done one honest thing in return: a letter, a coffee, a truth without a bow on it, and I understand that some of you listening will hear that and think it's real, a woman finally starting to change, and others will hear the exact same coffee shop and think it's 40 years too late to count for much. And I want to be honest that most days I'm not entirely sure which one of you is right. I only know I intend to keep showing up and finding out. If you've ever had to decide whether someone in your own family had actually changed or was just better at apologizing than they used to be at anything else, I'd like to hear where you landed, so tell me in the comments. And if these kinds of honest, complicated family stories are the ones you come back for, subscribe so the next one finds you.